We're here with Heidi in a beautiful field in the Lincolnshire Wolds. And we're here to talk about leadership, but also with horses, which might join us in a minute, although they're over there at the moment. So Heidi, do you want to say hello?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming along. I'm Heidi. I work with my team of horses. I'm a coach and therapist, but I work with my team of horses to really look at human potential and how we get the most out of our people in a really authentic and genuine way. So a lot of work around emotional intelligence, authentic leadership, etc.
And that's exactly why, well, not why we got to know each other, but when we got to know each other, but and then, oh, you do this and I do that, and it turns out we both have a very similar outlook. From our last chat we've had one brief chat about this. We thought, let's get together and make a little podcast. What I wanted to say is for me, there's some great phrases you pick up, and one of them was, first to understand others, you need to understand yourself.
Yeah.
And that used to be my little tagline when I first got into this world. And use psychometrics, such as strength deployment inventory, that sort of stuff. And I found it a revelation for myself. And sometimes you don't, you maybe don't like everything you find out about yourself. I've got a little bit into horses and how little phrases such as, if the horse is not doing what you want, you're asking it the wrong question. I don't know if that's the sort of phrase that you use as well.
Yeah.
But I'm really fascinated to hear about how, well, in our last conversation we talked about, one of my bugbears is we promote people on performance. They've achieved a target, they've hit a certain quality level or whatever it is, so we assume, let's make them a leader and throw in a bit of leadership training, and then you get people who feel uncomfortable leading, the people they lead, they're not very happy. So I'm just really want to know how you create the space to people to be better leaders.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because we always say that leadership can be taught, don't we? And I think to a degree it can, but that doesn't mean A, that everybody wants to do it, and B, that everybody's going to be good at it. And there's something very much about creating that space where people can discover their authentic leadership style, where it's not a coat that they put on. It's actually them being genuinely themselves, and sort of the power that has in terms of being able to engage people in much more genuine relationships.
I love that, because when we taught cadets at RAF College Cranwell, and we used to try and say, look, we want you to lead in your own style, because everyone thought, I've got to pump myself up and be this leader with a flat hand. And of course we said, no, of course you don't. There are times for that. And there's times you've got to stretch yourself into an uncomfortable space. Right, listen in now, this is what's happening. But the vast majority of the time, it's about being yourself. And sometimes we had some very introverted, quiet people. And I said, yeah, but you've got your own superpower. You've got that thing where what you say is usually very measured and meaningful, because they think before they speak, unlike me. And that quietness can draw people in, and it becomes really quite awesome. Other times they might have to, shout me out there.
Yeah.
But
and for me, I am that quiet person, and I've led teams for many years, but from that very much that quiet, introverted perspective, and we don't all have to be big and loud and brash. Sometimes being considered, but importantly being authentic and being yourself. And that's one of the things that I love about working with the horses, because you can't bluff it with them. They really let us see how we're showing up in the world, and what that allows us to do, I guess, is to see how, when we're being genuinely ourselves, we can engage with people very differently than when we're pretending to be something we're not, because the horses demand absolute congruence. If you go into their space trying to front it out and make out that you're the big I am, but on the inside you're quivering in your boots,
and
thinking,
they can spot it, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah, because they go with our energy. They're reading the energy in the environment all the time. That's how they keep themselves safe. And so whatever energy we bring into their space, they pick it up straight away. So if we're trying to front it out, but that's not how we're feeling on the inside, they go with what we're putting out from the inside. They don't actually care what we're visibly portraying. It's that energetic value that they really work with.
You said something, or a few things that I'm really interested in. You said some phrases there about being who you are, or something like that. And I'm working with Imelda Glacken. She's this incredible leadership coach. So we're working together now. We're combining sort of my more systemic or systematic,
Systemic. That'll do.
A process and my experience with the high performing teams, with her side with being a high in business and also about really getting to the deep person. So I really want us to have a chat with her. The other thing you said is about, I think if you try and put this armor on, or this cloak of I am this person, it's draining and it's unnerving, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what I want to ask you, you said you're introverted and quiet. Did you ever feel you had to be this sort of pumped up person?
Oh, absolutely. When I first started my first leadership role, my first paid leadership role, I think we're all leaders in some way, shape or form. In fact, my very first leadership role was bringing a bunch of kids home from school when I was 10, and I got paid £1 a week to take them all home, but we won't talk about that one. My first official leadership role, I was in my very early 20s, and I was thrown into recruiting a team, managing them, training them, delivering the service that we were there to deliver, never having had any management or leadership training
That never
at
happens,
all.
does it?
No, and it was an amazing opportunity, but my peer, my role model, and I learnt so much from him, but he quietly led with a rod of absolute iron, and he was one of those leaders where when he says jump, you ask how high. And as I say, I learnt an awful lot from him, and I have a huge amount of respect for him, but he also wasn't very authentic.
Oh.
And so a lot of the things that he would ask me to do with my team, he wouldn't be prepared to do himself. And so right from very early days in my leadership career, I always had lots of questions about whether this was the way to do it. And so I guess I would find myself, because it was hard work to be that out there commanding respect and failing miserably person, I would go completely the opposite way and regress and become very quiet. But that then gave me the space to be more contemplative and to observe my team. And I found that when I was being that introverted Heidi, my team came to me much more often than they did when I was being out there and showing the world how it should be done.
I imagine more comfortable for you as well.
What
I've seen that the shouty people, a bit like myself, realise actually watching more introverted, they'll just go around and quickly say, how's it going, blah blah blah, and they just quick engagement, everything good, need anything, and they just work very quietly and systematically round, and you realise it's all just coming together really nicely. Well, someone's just doing that you just hear white noise.
And I think it's really empowering for the other members of your team if you're not kind of poking to see how things are going all the time and checking in. There's an awful lot about trusting people to do the jobs that they're being paid to do as well. And again, it's something that the horses teach me all the time, that micromanaging just doesn't work. It disempowers, and I'm all about empowering people.
That was a great phrase I learned. A previous commandant at Sandhurst supposedly said, we talk about empowerment, or in the military they call it mission command. How much do you give? And he said you give away as much until it hurts and you feel uneasy, and then you give more.
Give a bit more,
What I really want to ask you is, how do you use your horses to make people reflect on their own abilities? Because borrowing styles, like you said, was great. I love that. We can all think of those people. Oh, I love that bit. I'm going to try and take that bit and make it my own. But how do you use the horses to turn that mirror around on people? Which I'm assuming what you would do.
We work with them in quite a few different ways, but the first thing is to acknowledge what we're taking into the space, and that the horses demand us to be authentic. if we go into their space being anything other than authentic, then they let us see straight away what it is that we're.
So what does that look like then?
So it could be anything from withdrawing from the space, so the horses might choose just to disengage. They may, if they feel a lot of confusion about what we're presenting, then they could become quite active and agitated. Whereas if we start to modify and be more authentic and congruent, then their energy levels come down, and they're more willing to engage. So even from those really kind of basic first minutes, first moments with the horses, they're showing us straight away what it is that we're bringing.
What they're seeing. Okay, so do you start off with people just going, just stand in the pen and look at the horse, or do you ask them to do something?
Yeah, one of the first things I do is actually get people, whether it's one-to-one or a group, get people to go and just spend a few minutes just being in amongst the herd.
Okay.
So we do things, we do a check-in first to see how our energy and emotions are before we go in.
How you feeling?
How you're feeling,
yeah.
so that you then become aware of any changes. So for some people, as soon as they say, right, okay, let's go to the horses, they'll notice a change in their body, because what we're trying to do is get people out of their heads and listening to what their bodies are telling them. Much more about that emotional intelligence, listening to messages from the body, gut instincts, etc. However you want to dress it up, but less thinking and more feeling. And so one of the first things that I ask people to do, if they're comfortable with it, is to go into the space with the horses and just notice how each horse makes them feel. And it's quite a useful opportunity to put a question in there as well about trust, because there's so much in leadership that is underpinned by trust.
Yeah.
So I might say, as you go to each horse, just ask yourself, do I trust you and do you trust me? And see what response you get from yourself, from the horse, because the horses will respond differently to each person, and each person will feel differently about each horse as well.
It's a thing I've really got into a few years ago, is like the three brain model, and especially we've got this sort of neocortex mammal brain, and especially our very highly developed frontal cortex, our logic and reasoning, and
the bit that causes all the trouble.
Yeah. Well, it tries. Something it's been described as being the headmaster trying to keep control, and is the executive decision making. But also we have our limbic brain, where our emotions and feelings come from. But we tend to say no, don't listen to those. They've been around for millions and millions of years, and that's why we have arguments with ourselves, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
We think, and you can ask a question with people. How do you feel about that? And they'll describe it in a way which is all more logic. So use a word to describe how you feel, and that's difficult because it's actually the part of the brain where there's no language apparently.
Well, again, if you think about it, when we're kids, when we're little, we are very much coming from that limbic brain. We feel stuff. We don't do a lot of thinking, but then the message that we get all the time is, think about what you're doing, think about what you're saying. What were you thinking then? It's all shifting that perspective into that frontal cortex, into the thinking part, and we start to forget to exercise the muscle, the feeling muscle, and so we kind of disconnect from what our bodies are telling us, and actually, our bodies and our emotions have been keeping us safe since our caveman days, and when we listen to what our bodies are telling us about the situations that we find ourselves in and the people we meet, we actually make much better decisions than we do when we start thinking about things, because that's when it all gets a bit messed up, because our logic isn't always very logical.
Well, we can be fooled, can't we, by so easily by what we see, because we're very visually biased, aren't we? But there's something underneath, there's an undercurrent which has got all these little cues which we sort of tend to relegate, don't we? And also the other thing is that what drives us and motivates us is the chemicals that go through our body, happiness, sadness, fear, or whatever. they motivate us to things, and our logic tries to make sense of that.
Yeah. And
so
we're not actually designed to do a lot of thinking.
No.
That is not our superpower.
No, it's not, isn't it? It's like people say, pay 100% to this task, but our brains have evolved to go so they don't have to think about things, so we can do it automatically.
Yeah.
You know, which is why I keep forgetting things and losing things and, and what have you. So, I really want to ask you. So we've got the horses. I think you can probably see them in the distance. They're not being as nosy as you said they might be today.
Yeah, let the sound down there.
So, I'm interested to know, like, authenticity. And we talked about this briefly the other day. Because there's probably toxic leaders, with leaders who invariably, I think, are in an uncomfortable space because that's all they know. And I need to be this person who, you know, just controls. Or have you had instances where people have gone, "Oh my God"? Does it happen a lot?
It happens.
Yeah, or maybe they'll go quietly and and reflect.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really fascinating is, particularly with very experienced leaders, people who've got a long leadership career, and they've kind of developed their style, and there's kind of this assumption that style is them, that's what they're all about, and that works for everybody. And actually, you know, when you ask a leader who's been leading his team for 25 years to move a horse from A to B without touching it, then all of a sudden all those things, all those tools, all those techniques that they've used in the past get challenged. Because, as we know, a horse won't move from A to B just because you've asked it to or told it to. There has to be buy-in, and so immediately you're asking somebody to question their style and think about, does this work for everybody? If it's not working for everybody, is it working for me? So it starts really early on in the work that we do.
I imagine that could put people in a very uncomfortable place, because I've sort of come across people who I suspect they've become fused and calcified because they've progressed up the ladder, as it were, with whatever techniques, but the metrics that we use to promote people are actually really poor at identifying good leaders. You know, and I've written people up, they're really great, and when you actually speak to the people they've led, you realise they're hopeless.
Yeah.
And you go, oh God, you know, and you've again, another ineffective or even toxic person has been pushed up. So I wonder, it's a very uncomfortable place for someone to be and go, maybe I've been getting this wrong all these years, maybe there's another way. If people calcify, I think you've got to be open to and be vulnerable to go, oh, I got it wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with saying we've got something wrong, is there? And, you know, we talk about, we've touched on toxic leadership, but also toxic leadership creates a toxic environment as well. And when that environment is toxic, then that ability, that option and opportunity to learn from mistakes disappears, because actually we're too afraid of making the mistake to actually create the learning space. And I think there's a huge richness in having an environment where it's okay to get things wrong, because we don't learn anything from getting everything right. And it's one of the things that I think is really important. People always say to me, oh, you know, what do we need? So when we're doing some work around leadership, for example, we might have an exercise set up in the menage that might be, for the sake of argument, moving the horses between two barrels. And so people will say, well, okay, so what do I need to do to get that right? And it isn't about getting it right. It's about, how do you work together? How do you communicate? What do you learn from each other from seeing it go wrong? And I love it when it goes wrong.
Oh, I love the sound. So it's basically team dynamics, working as a team rather than
rather than, you know, and it shows up so much as well. You know, did the team have a strategy? Or did they just go in gung ho and then panic when they've realised that we might